Serious alien abductees or those who claim to have seen a UFO alien phenomena. What is your story? I'm not sure if this counts as alien or not, but I definitely saw something I can't explain at all about 5 years ago and have been dying to tell the story in a thread. About 5 years ago, me and 2 other friends were on our way back from Warped Tour in Maryland, being driven by one of the friends' mom because none of us had a car we could drive yet. It was almost night. The sun was still kind of out and it wasn't that dark yet, and we were driving on a 2-lane highway that had trees on either side of the road and a median in the middle of the lanes. Basically, some creature ran out from the trees on the other side of the highway, jumped the median and sprinted towards the trees on our side. We almost hit the thing and our friend's mom had to slam on the brakes and everyone as the car was screaming our heads off. Not because it was a look out for that deer situation, but because this was the scariest freaking looking thing I've ever seen. It was black, had long gangly limbs and moppy black long stringy hair. This thing moved so freaking weird I can see it clearly to this day. It galloped so awkwardly, did not run at all like a deer or anything of the sort. When it jumped off of the back 2 legs and landed again on the back 2 legs before coming down and galloping across the road. Everyone in the car said the same thing, which was, what the frick was that thing? To this day I am convinced it was a demon or an alien or an escaped medical experiment. It was large and terrifying, and the way it moved was unlike anything I have ever seen in my life. I wish I had more details, but sadly that's all I remember. I've asked my friends and that friend's mom about it numerous times years after the fact, and it still gives everyone shivers. Mine happened in the early 2000s. I was around 16. Me, my brother, my friend and friend's father were catfishing on Lake Okeechobee in FL. The father had a large pontoon houseboat, so we stayed out there all night. Anyways, the father had went to bed and at about 2 AM I decided I was going to bed. I lay down for about 5 minutes when my brother and friend came into the cabin and told me to wake up. I wasn't asleep yet, so I just got up. We walk out on deck and they both just point out west in the sky. There was this orangish blue ball kinda floating but moving side to side a bit. We just stared at it for a few minutes. As we kept watching, it would change color. It changed from orange to bluish to greenish and back. There was no pattern. It also moved different directions. Finally, after a few minutes, it just hauled butt and was gone. We weren't drinking or doing drugs, but we all saw it. Kind of freaked us out, but it was pretty cool. I have no idea what it was, but it was very strange. It wasn't a helicopter or plane, I do know that. Never thought I'd be someone to have a missing time story, but it happened. The 29th of December 2001, we left my house at 6 PM. We rode our bikes to the woods down THD block and hung out there for a bit. My friend was crushing the iced lake with a fence pole we found, and suddenly I heard footsteps behind me. I got up and ran to my friends and the lake was frozen back over. We checked the time. It was 8:15. We then saw the most amazing shooting star horizon to horizon above us. We even heard it. We hid in the woods and saw a star slowly move across the sky. Normally I would say it's a satellite, but it moved a few inches in the sky and then stopped. There's no way over 2 hours went by. The woods are just a few blocks away. Mine happened probably back in about 95-96-ish. At the time, I was a pizza delivery guy. I was out on a delivery, and after the delivery, I was returning to the store. While driving along the highway, I noticed 3 still lights, almost in a row, way off above the horizon. It was evening dark. Stars were visible. First thought was that they were from planes for the airport, as they were way brighter than the stars that were out. They only looked still cause I was driving on the highway, and my mind was playing tricks on me, etc etc. Over the course of the next few minutes, as I was continuing down the highway, I noticed the center light started moving up. It continued into the shape of a triangle. I continued to try to keep an eye on triangle of lights in the distance as the whole thing started moving up in the sky. I eventually lost eyesight of this thing behind trees whatever else and made it back to work. Was utterly confused by the whole thing. Didn't tell anyone cause I figured they'd think I was crazy. I kind of even thought myself I was seeing things and making crap up. Dunno why I remember this part. This all happened about a week before Super Bowl. Might have even been the Friday before Super Bowl. And sure, all I remember is that before the Super Bowl, I was watching C-Feed channel. Some show was on about people who had seen UFOs. Whatever. I was always skeptical at best. Then they did a segment on the numerous sights of triangle-shaped lights, and they started showing clips of the few examples that people had caught on video. It was exactly what I had seen. Never saw anything since. No one else reported any strange sights that weekend that I knew of. Course I was a dumb early 20s kid, so I did pay attention to local news, but I'll never forget that incident. The Phoenix Lights is pretty well documented, and was seen by a whole city. Last Halloween me and my friends were on a dock about to light off some fireworks. We had all just arrived and were still just shooting the crap to see if anyone else would show up. Myself and my buddy were looking up at the stars when right above a hill behind our town we seen a light and it looked really odd. It was sort of bluish grey in color, but what was interesting was it had a metallic rainbow colored halo around it in the shape of a magnetic field, like how you see the magnetic field of the earth. It was just hovering there at first, but then it slowly moved in a sort of wavy motion from east to west, and then when it got to the edge of the hill it hovered for a minute longer and then shot straight up into the sky. It wasn't very high in the sky, maybe 1000, 2000 ft in the air. I will never forget the color of that magnetic rainbow force field looking thing. Holy crap. My dad claimed that he saw something that exactly meets your description when he was about 20 years old in the middle of nowhere in Alberta, Canada. This happened a while ago. I was probably around 14 when I saw it. I lived at my old house at the time in a very spaced out neighborhood in Texas. It was about 10 PM and my dad and sister were outside for some reason in the backyard and I was inside watching TV. My sister comes running in and tells me to come out and see this. In the sky was this massive circular disc probably about 75 feet in circumference and about 150 feet in the air right above our backyard with circular lights all around it. It's your typical UFO that you'd think of. Anyways, I ran inside to get my dad's camera and came back out and it started moving slowly into the front yard, so we ran through the house into the front, which probably took us 3 seconds. When we got into the front it was gone. Nowhere in the distance or anything. My whole family saw it and we have no idea what it was. This may have just been a very vivid childhood dream, but whenever I think about it, it never feels like it. It has to be, though. Anyway, my mom was a single mom who worked an overnight shift when I was young. Despite this being totally illegal, she used to let me stay home by myself overnight in our apartment. One night, I remember seeing this being in my bedroom. I cowered under my comforter as I watched the being draw glowing lines along the wall near my door. I asked the being what it meant and in my head it told me that I would eventually understand someday. This was before I'd ever seen any movies, TV shows with aliens in it. You know, the grey ones with the big eyes. I don't think this one was grey though. I kind of remember it being like a sickly greenish white, but it did have big eyes. The reason most of these visitations by little beings occur in the bedroom is because the person is sleeping dreaming. Not a lot of beings visiting people at a 7-Eleven on a random Sunday afternoon. When I was about 12 my family bought a fishing cabin by a small river about 70 miles from our home. On our first visit to stay in this cabin it was kind of a work vacation, meaning we were painting and fixing and stuff as well as fishing. One of the people who lived near this cabin came over to say hi and introduce herself. During the course of her visit she told us, "Don't be afraid of the purple glowing mist you will see. It's just from the UFOs and it won't hurt you." All of us kids snickered at this while elbowing each other, so my mom chased us off and apologized to the woman. She later yelled at us for being rude. 2 nights later we were out night fishing with our dad. The stars were amazing looking without the city's light pollution and we were all pointing at different constellations and challenging each other to name them. My youngest brother pointed to a perfect circle of about 7 bright stars and asked, "What are those called?" We all kind of froze and stared because, well, there is no such constellation, yet here it was. While we were looking at it all the stars took off silently in different directions and vanished over all the surrounding horizons. We ran. Looking back it was stupid to run. I mean the things were already gone. But we were spooked and we ran as fast as we could back to the cabin where mom was sleeping. About half the way there our dad overtook us and ran straight into the cabin ahead of us, slamming the door. When we got in the cabin he told us, "Just shut up and go to bed." He sounded angry so we did just that. The next morning at breakfast when we tried to talk about it, Dad angrily said that he didn't remember any of that and to stop with the stupid stories. My sister asked, "Why did you run then?" He said that he was tired and wanted to get to bed was all. He was tired so he ran. My dad could be a real goober sometimes. This wasn't the only time we saw things in the sky while staying there, but it was the most interesting. We tried on a few occasions to get pictures, but it was the early 60s and cameras sucked half the time back then. At least the cheap kid cameras we had did. We were afraid asked to use Dad's good camera for that. We only had that cabin for a few years when my dad suddenly sold it. We never could get him to talk about that night. He would firmly deny it every time we tried. Never did see the purple glowing mist though we looked for it. This actually occurred last week on the 15th of January, 2016. I live in Outer Sunset in San Francisco and around 7 PM poked my head out the window to see if it was raining. It wasn't. I heard a loud aircraft overhead which was several magnitudes louder than the planes that normally fly in the area from SFO. I looked to my left and saw a plane that appeared to be a commercial aircraft, but I noticed it was much larger and the lights were super bright and creating large cones of light ahead of it. I remember thinking how neat it looked being able to see so much of the craft and area around it lit up with such a cloudy evening. When I tried to focus in on it the lights flickered off and I lost it completely. I could still hear it very loudly though. About 10 seconds went by and I see something come alight about 2 blocks to my right. I see a lot of commercial aircraft out there, but this was easily 4 to 6 times larger in the sky than they normally appear. The lights were strange too. I saw what appeared to be 4 white jet exhausts, and across the whole craft there were blue and red lights and lines slowly glimmering. It moved much slower than regular planes and was visible for about 10 seconds moving north along the beach. It then vanished after about 10 seconds. Confused as all heck, I looked around to see if anyone else had witnessed it. Lo and behold, someone on the corner of my street who was riding their bike had stopped and was gazing up at the sky in the same location as the craft had been. I shouted down to them, "Hey, did you see that? What was that?" They turned and looked at me, looked back at the sky, then back at me, then without saying anything got on their bike and rode away quickly. I could still hear the craft so I got onto my roof and about half a minute or so later saw it come from behind me and slowly fly west out over the ocean until it vanished. I stayed on my roof waiting to catch it again but I didn't hear or see it. After about 20 minutes regular aircraft began flying overhead per usual. My best guess was it could have been some sort of military aircraft, or perhaps several in tight formation. Still the loudest and largest aircraft I've ever seen out there. BTW thanks for nothing dude on bike. Once, I was trying to sleep but suddenly felt thirsty so I turned around to reach for a bottle of water on my dressing table. Turning this way gave me a direct view towards the doorway, where I think I saw a stereotypical grey alien. It was staring at me, illuminated by the hallway light that sneaked in through a gap between the door and the door frame. Since the encounter lasted barely a second, I didn't get a good look at it, but it resembled a stereotypical grey alien. Big eyes, no visible nose, act. I think it was also smaller than I was at the time, and I was 10 years old. After that, I dove under my blankets, and fell asleep after a while. Sorry for any grammar errors, I'm French. Let me preface this by stating that almost all of the encounters that I have witnessed have been with at least one other individual. The first 2 encounters happened on 2 consecutive days in 1997, and the numerous other encounters happened over the span of 90 days a year and a half ago. I do not recall being abducted. I have filed reports with the incredibly incompetent MUFON. Back in 1997 my buddy and I had just finished up our shift at a pizza joint. It was after 11 PM. We were wore out and wanted to get stoned. We were completely sober. Anyway, we drove out into a cornfield in the off year, so it was full of rye. We were about a half mile off the road. It was pitch black, and because of our vantage point, I could see headlights in any direction for a good mile. We were way out in the country, so no worries. My buddy starts breaking up the weed when I notice what I believe to be truck headlights shine directly from behind, take a hard left, and disappear. My buddy didn't seem to notice, but I became frantic. I thought it was the cops. My friend thinks I am messing with him and continues breaking up some really terrible brickweed. I recall looking at the stars and one star in particular grabbed my attention. I can't tell you why, but it looked like your average star. Within 30 seconds this star starts moving up and down, side to side, and in circles. I yelled in a panic, "What the frick is that?" My buddy gives a dismissive sigh, and then he looks where I am pointing. For 5 minutes the UFO continues to move in very fluid movements, making impossible maneuvers, and do so in complete silence. Without notice, this one object becomes 5 equally impressive star-like objects. They stayed close together. At times they moved in some kind of formation, and other times they seemed to move independently. Just as quick as the 5 came, they fused back together as one. We were in shock, but we didn't feel like we were in harm's way. We were recapping what we witnessed, but that single UFO was still there. It wasn't moving too much. We thought things were coming to a close, but we were wrong. This time the one object turned into at least 7 objects. The way they moved and jerked around felt aggressive to me. My friend must have felt the same way, because he said he was starting to get nervous. I told him we should go. I embarrassingly confessed that I knew it was there for us, and I became fearful. We all bust out of there, and this thing follows us to the outskirts of town. The stories actually get far more interesting and do include ETs and different types of UFOs. I'll keep going if anyone is interested. I have seen, and although it's dismissed by most people I will share once more. It was 4th of July 2 years ago. I was in Seattle getting ready to watch the fireworks display over Lake Washington Union. About 20 minutes before it begins I saw 3 orange-yellow lights flying in a perfect equilateral triangle formation. They flew south to the middle of the lake and then hit 90 degrees straight up into the clouds. I have one. I don't know where I stand on the whole ET UFO controversy, but I can vividly recall an experience from my childhood that I've never forgotten and can't explain. I was maybe 10 or 11 years old. I distinctly remember it because it caused in me a sense of terror more pure than any I had or have felt since. My parents' house is out in the country and my old bedroom is on the 2nd floor, with 2 windows facing north and west respectively. My bed was up against the west wall just beneath the window. My dog Henry was sleeping with me that night. I woke up to the sound of Henry barking and found my room bathed in light from the window above my bed. I can vividly recall Henry silhouetted, staring into the light, barking her brains out. I jerked up and looked out, but there was only light. A crackly, humming, droning sound filled the air. I was disoriented and terrified, both for myself and for my dog, but all I could do was pull my blankets over my head and curl into a ball. I was sure Henry was going to die. I remember feeling sorry that I was too frightened to help. In my head the clear thought "I don't want to die" repeated over and over, and I was aware that it was the first time in my life that I had ever really not wanted to die. Like, it was the first time I'd ever genuinely felt that I was going to die. The experience ends there. I woke up the next morning with Henry in my bed. I immediately went to my parents' room and woke them up to ask if they'd seen the light or heard Henry barking, but they hadn't. I wondered if I'd dreamt it, but I'd never had a dream so visceral before. All the fear I'd experienced up till that point became a lower classification. Now there was fear, and there was real fear. When I first heard about sleep paralysis, my mind immediately went to that night. It had some of the same characteristics: the terror, the vividness, the weird noise, but I wasn't paralyzed. I moved twice. Once when I sat up and peeked into the light, and again when I pulled my blankets over my head and hid. Have seen several sightings, and each time, I become less enthused because they happen so frequently here. First time I was 21 years old, had just left the gym with a close friend and we decided to sit on my balcony for some fresh air. It was around 8 PM. Sun had already set and my apartment was on the highest floor. Great view of the Tucson mountains, and suddenly 5 to 7 lights appeared. It was like someone flipped on a switch, and each one slowly turned on, all equal distance to the next. If you're familiar with the Tucson mountains, there are no buildings whatsoever that could be blocking this area, and typically commercial planes fly over the area, but it's very briefly and they descend quite quickly. We sat there for about 15 minutes, just watching these lights stay in place when suddenly they moved and became diagonal to one another. I had texted my girlfriend at the time to hurry home, and when she walked in she immediately started making fun of us, until she stepped out and also saw the bizarre lights. Most recently I was on my way home from work, headed toward the same mountain range, when I saw about 6 cars pulled over and everyone was grouping together. At first I assumed a major accident took place, so I pulled over to offer help until I realized everyone was pointing at a similar light formation across the way. Not sure if the news reported it, but the sighting was freaky enough to stop traffic. TLDR, you see freaky crap in southern Arizona all the time. I was driving east down a highway in central PA. It was 1996 to 1997. It was around 11:30, so not much traffic. I noticed something off to my left in the sky. There were 5 orange balls of light flying in a sort of diamond formation at maybe 5,000 feet. This is my best guess. It looked so weird I pulled over. They didn't appear to be going real fast, but you could tell they were moving. Suddenly they broke formation and started to zigzag all over the sky. After about 10 seconds of this, they shot straight up in the sky and were gone in an instant. Dumbfounded, I looked around for a minute and saw a guy standing across the road next to his car looking up at the sky. I called out to him saying, "Did you see that?" "What do you think?" he said. "Probably thinking the same as you," I said. "Well, that was cool," he said, and got into his car and left. Not sure what it was, but I know I wasn't the only one who saw it that night. See, it's reports like this that make me think, maybe. Probably no one cares, but hey, I've got a relatively tame missing journey one. One night about 10 years ago, me and a friend were hanging out with another friend who lived in a nearby village. Hour and walk. Because we knew the route was dangerous at night, we deliberately didn't have anything to drink. So we watched Rocky and ate junk food and all the other things teenagers do when they aren't drinking and doing drugs, and left the house at 1 AM. We walked and chatted, making our way home until we get to the awkward field we have to cross to get back to our town. About halfway, it's dark and muddy, so we stop talking as much and pay more attention to the floor. In no time at all we come to the other end of the field and are pretty much home. So we check the time. 1:25. We just done an hour walk in 25 minutes. I can't run that distance in 25 minutes. We'd both checked the time when we left our friend's house and both checked it when we got off the field, and it was the middle of August, so it wasn't daylight savings. That's the closest I've got. We still occasionally mention it when we see each other. One time I went skinny dipping with a couple friends at a neighbor's house who was on vacation. Friend 1 went underwater to swim the length of the pool. The moment he went under the water, me and friend 2 notice a grouping of lights in the sky. 5 skinny V-shaped white lights in a pentagon shape flew slowly across the sky. You could tell that they were flying parallel to the earth, like a plane, rather than it being a spotlight or something from the ground. It also was going above and below clouds. Friend 1, who's still underwater, reaches the end of the pool and swims back. The moment he surfaces out of the water, the lights are out of view and friend 2 and I are losing our minds. Took a while of convincing friend 1 that he had missed a UFO sighting. I was never one to believe in superstition, but it's one thing that I just can't explain. I have never told anyone about this, but since you guys are sharing, I was about 6 years old and my father and I were separated from each other as we were roaming around the Page Museum in Los Angeles. I entered a back room where 3 blonde-haired people were all sitting at a table facing me. They were really tall and wore very fitted clothes. They asked me if I wanted to come back to their planet with them or stay with my current family. I thought about it and I decided to stay on Earth. I then left the room to look for my father. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I chose leaving Earth. They were probably just stoned Germans who wanted to take you on a wacky techno-themed adventure. I keep seeing flashing lights in the sky in my hometown. It's a pretty remote town and a pretty remote country, so I didn't really pay attention. I can find 4 on the horizon and they are evenly spaced. They flash 3 colors. They are not radio towers, and they are pretty creepy. I've never seen a UFO, but I've experienced what most people call grays. For the entirety of my 34 years, they, or perhaps a small group of them, have been interested in me for reasons beyond my comprehension. I can't say for certain if what I've experienced is real, but the fact that the fear is so strong makes it very hard to ignore. They show up, they look, and they look so deep into you. The fear and helplessness is like nothing you will ever experience in waking life. The very life within you shrinks and shakes and they keep looking, sometimes inches from your face. It is pure fare, and when you wake it is like you have been born again. Sure, it could be night terrors, but night terrors don't leave doors open, TVs on, and your pets terrified under furniture. Mine is not that extraordinary, but I will always remember it. My great aunt and uncle were visiting us in Florida from Ohio about 3 or 4 years ago, and my great uncle was really into space and had a really nice telescope. I'm interested in space myself, so we decided to set up his telescope outside to look at some planets if we could. We were outside in the street setting up the camera, and my uncle asked me to go inside and turn off the lights out front because it was interfering with the telescope. So I go inside and turn the lights off, but when I come back out, I couldn't find my uncle. At the same exact time, it suddenly got very windy, and I looked up at the sky and I saw a very large, blue light in between clouds, like this object or whatever was clearly above a cloud and beneath another, if that makes sense. Anyways, it was moving very slowly, and it was pretty bright, and it only appeared for maybe 4 or 5 seconds before it was just gone, and the wind died down to almost none. When it was over I was kind of confused. I looked into the street and my uncle was back, and I think I was just so spooked by what happened I decided to completely ignore it. I asked his uncle if he saw it and he said no, and I told him I couldn't find him and he called me a goof. So that's my story. Small story, but it's something I never could figure out. When I was in middle school, I slept in a bed with a large window at the foot of the bed. One night I was awakened to a loud rumbling. Imagine a jet flying over your house. This noise was accompanied by a very bright light lighting up my room through the blinds. So I quickly sat up and looked through the blinds to see what appeared to be an aircraft of some sort. It seemed to be at least the size of 2 or 3 small houses. It looked like a triangle with a circular platform at each vertex and 3 lights in triangular form on each circle. It flew very slow and low over my house. Scared the crap out of me. I really need to sit down one day and write in detail what my friend and I saw one night. Every time I see this question I've wanted to share. Oh well, I'll give the gist of it and maybe one day elaborate in detail. Friend and I on the porch at the back of a house we rented. He says holy crap, and I look over and he's looking at the sky. I look up to the area he's looking at and we see 2 extremely bright lights, not moving in the sky. One was directly above the other. I quickly glanced over to where the North Star is, cause I like looking at the night sky anyway and knew where it was that time of night. To compare brightness, these lights were way brighter. They stayed still for maybe 20-30 seconds where they were, then suddenly, the top one shot off up and diagonal right from where it was at an insane speed. It was a streak across the sky. The second one that was underneath just slowly faded away afterward. I quickly glanced over to where the North Star is, cause I like looking at the night sky anyway and knew where it was that time of night. You may be interested to know that the North Star stays in the same place all night and day long. A couple years ago I was in central Arizona with a couple of friends driving out on some Forest Service roads around 9 PM or so. We stopped at this giant boulder just sort of jutting out of the ground and climbed up to sit and enjoy the desert view for a little bit. We're sitting there talking when I notice this weird orange light, looking like a bright star, out in the sky. At first it's just sitting in one spot, but then it starts moving around fast as heck in all sorts of directions, just like your typical UFO dancing lights phenomenon you'd see on a hoax video. I can't quite remember how it showed up, whether it just appeared or flew into view, but a second identical light showed up, and these things just started looping and darting around the sky. At first we chalked it up to some people flying quadcopters, as they were the only thing I've ever seen dart around like that. However, as quiet as we could be, we couldn't hear so much as a low hum. It was dead silent out there. Mind you, I grew up in central MD right under the flight paths for BWI Airport, so I know planes, what they look like, how bright they are, and the weird optical illusions you'll see from them flying through haze and clouds. At this point we had all lived in Arizona for a few years, so we were all familiar with satellites and how they look. The distances these lights seem to be covering. Picture your horizon as a circle. I'd say they were going back and forth across a distance of about 1/6 of that circle, all while appearing to be a distant plane. Combined with the total silence, ruled out quadcopters. They pretty much just danced around for a few minutes before they both shot off in one direction, extremely fast, and faded away in the blink of an eye. I don't know what to tell you. I honestly have no idea what they were. The grand reaction we all had was turning to each other afterwards and saying, well, what in the frick was that? My wife told me this story. Now while there is no alien inference, it is still weird as heck. When my wife was in her teens, I think she said 14 or 15, she and a few female friends were spending the night at her friend's house. They all went to bed that night at the same time. When they woke up, they were over a mile away from her friend's house in an orange grove laying on the ground. You're talking like 5 girls, teens, no alcohol or drugs. Nobody could move all of them a mile away without waking them up. None were known sleepwalkers either. My wife has always been a very light sleeper. I can't get out of bed in the morning without her waking up. Luckily one of them had their phone on them and had to call for a ride. But here is what I find extra bizarre. My wife and her friends that I have asked about this that she is still friends with completely accept it as something funny and brush it off. This is not something you just brush off as random and inconsequential. Maybe it's a lie, but they were all dead serious about it. It is almost to the point like they were brainwashed about the incident. This line of reasoning is not normal for a person, especially if this is not something that happens regularly. I would lose my crap trying to figure out how I ended up there. There is no logical explanation how 5 girls can go to sleep with parents home and end up over a mile away in an orange grove. To this day it is one thing about my wife that I cannot understand, and it subconsciously bugs me because I want to know the truth more than anything, whereas she, the person this happened to, could care less to know. It's just not right. Okay, this one is very unique and I know it's not like any alien encounters I have ever heard anyone else ever talk about. So this happened in a very crowded environment some 20+ years ago. These 2 girls started talking to my friend and me. They were not really attractive girls, but they were very nice and we sat and talked to them a while. The girl I was talking to looked like she was from India. Eyes really wide open, like you could see the entire iris of her eyes. Anyway, she started talking about some weird crap. Stuff about our government was going to start tracking us. That one day people wouldn't use cash anymore and crap at the time that sounded pretty far out there. This was pre-internet. She then started saying some really far out stuff, like talking about how she was really over 80 years old. She was likely only about 20 or so. But it was entertaining, and at one point she even said, "Don't think I'm just some crazy person," which I kind of laughed about. But what happened next was something that it's still hard for me to imagine it happened. She put her hands near my eyes and looked me in the eye. I looked back and it was like I started falling into her head as best I can explain. Then there was really powerful buzz and she telepathically showed me she was an alien. I was absolutely terrified at that point. She then pulled her hands away and said, "Now you know." I was scared and wanted to run, but couldn't. I wanted to say something but I couldn't speak. It was almost as if someone shut me off. I could only just sit there and look around. I saw people walking by and wanted to yell for help, but I couldn't. My friend was just standing there talking to the other girl. Then after maybe 10 minutes or so my friend said, "I'm cold, let's go to the car to get my jacket." I still couldn't talk and just looked at the Indian girl alien. He said it again, "Let's go get my jacket." The Indian girl said, "I guess you better go." I was able to then stand up, but still couldn't talk. We walked for about 5 minutes and it was like the spell was broken and I was me again. I tried to just get everything out at once and I blurted out that girl was an alien, and she buzzed my brain as I said that. The sheer horror of how crazy that sounded hit me. He laughed and I laughed, kind of like I was just joking. I knew from that day forward nobody would ever believe my story, even the most die-hard alien enthusiasts. I felt somehow connected to her for another day or so. Like she somehow knew what I was doing in my daily life. I would like to tell myself that it never really happened. That maybe I had some kind of once in a lifetime psychotic break from reality or something that just makes sense. But the fact that she said "now you know" out loud right after the telepathic link makes it pretty hard to dismiss as something that was just in my mind. Visited would be the best word to describe mine. I was a child and woke in the night to my bedroom being submerged in blinding light with multiple silhouettes outlined. Either a visit or a vivid child's dream. One night, A friend and I were outside having a smoke when we spotted what looked like a fireball just hovering in the air. We're up, probably 30k feet I'd guess. After watching it for about 30 seconds a small fireball seemed to fall from it, and at our angle it appeared to be heading for the ground. Suddenly the large fireball streaked across the sky, passing over us, and disappearing about halfway to the horizon. Still no idea what we saw. That's called a meteorite. It was 4 years ago. My cousin and I came out of the woods after deer hunting about 45 minutes before dusk. My uncle was also coming out of the woods at the same time. We met at his truck and just stood around talking for a while. My cousin saw it first. There were 2 sets of 5 light each hovering above the tree line about 1/2 mile away. One set would stay still as the other would go down behind the trees. When it was at its lowest you could hear a loud noise, one I can't really describe. After the noise the craft would return to the height the other craft was hovering. Craft 2 would then drop down and do the same thing. This went on for a good half an hour. All of us were just stunned by what we were seeing. The weirdest part was above the crafts high in the sky, about the level or higher than planes fly, was a ring of lights, almost like planes circling an airport. Eventually the crafts just took off at an angle away from us and were gone, and the lights high in the sky were gone as well. We stopped talking about it because no one believed us. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.